join us to talk about planning for all of those scenarios is financial advisor Rick Bloom, who's joining us now on the Megacast from Bloom Advisors. Rick, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Tyler.
Appreciate having you on. So right now, what would you say are the three most important things that people should be thinking about as they're financially planning for the present in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic and for the future in both a scenario where we continue in this crisis for the foreseeable future and the other scenario where we sooner rather than later emerge from the other side of this?
Well, I think you said the key word, plan. I think one of the basic problems most people have is they never have a game plan. They either go day to day, month to month, they look at the market every day, something of that nature. So I think that the most important thing for people to do is to have a game plan. And that game plan has to be based upon their individual goals and objectives, what an individual's trying to achieve. That's why I say the first step along the way, everyone should start off and do a personal balance sheet. Nothing more than a listing of their assets and their liabilities so they know where they're starting from. And the second thing everyone needs to do is a cash flow statement. So they need to know what it costs them to live a month, not what you think it costs you to live, but what it actually does. You know, the old days taking, pencil to paper and writing out your expenses, you really need to do that. So I think, that is probably the most important step that people need to do is find out where they're starting from. Two, I think people need to really consider where they stand with retirement. I like to tell people, Tyler, that retirement's a brand new concept in the history of mankind. This isn't something people worried about 150 years ago. They went home on Friday and they died. Today, you look at retirement, it's round two. People are living 30 plus years in retirement, so I think you have to make sure that you have a game plan for retirement. And three, at the same time, I think it's important that you live for today and save for tomorrow. You have to have a game plan that allows you to enjoy today and at the same time make sure you're putting enough money away for your future.
And where should those considerations start? Because you mentioned just doing the basics and getting that pen and paper out, getting that calculator out, going through each and every one of your monthly bills, and your other bills as well to know what it costs you to live on a monthly basis. That's just the basis there for you to know this is how much money I need to be bringing in every month just to live at the most basic level. But then there's other considerations for paying down other debts, for financially planning for your future if you're looking to buy a home, or if you're looking to upgrade certain appliances in your home, or get a new vehicle, or whatever the case may be. And then there's even further considerations for when you're looking toward retirement. When should those plans start, and where should they start?
Well, I think they should start day one. I always tell kids that graduate college, from the day you start working, you have to have a financial plan in order. You need to take care of your finances from day one. And it doesn't stop really until the day you depart this earth. Because, think about when someone retires. They may retire at 65. Well, they can easily be around 20 years from now. Well, if they don't have a game plan that is evolving, they're going to be in trouble. Because we know one thing for sure, you have to have a rising income the rest of your life. So I think that there's not one point in time. I think it's throughout your lifetime, your adult life, you need to have a financial plan that gears you to what you're trying to accomplish. You mentioned like a new house. Well, the issue would be, when do you want that new house? Are you saving for something that is 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road? It's important to start putting time frames to these items, because you're going to invest differently if you're saving for 10 years down the road than if you're saving for something 6 months down the road. And I'll give you an example. Most people think, if you ask them, the stock market's aggressive and, it's an aggressive investment. Well, if you're saving for something 15, 20, 25 years down the road, stock market's not aggressive at all. On the other hand, if you're saving for something 6 months down the road, stock market's very aggressive. So I think that people need to, throughout their lifetime, they're going to have goals. They need to identify those goals and set a time frame for them, and then start investing according to what that time frame is. So if someone told me that they were buying a house in 6 months from now, what should they do with their money now? I would say, The only thing you can do is buy CDs, 6-month CDs. I would not invest it in the market right now because I think that's too aggressive. Well, on the other hand, if someone told me that they're retiring in 15 years, where should most of their money be? I would say it should be in the market.
We're joined by
I think it's those time frames that are really key these days.
We're joined by Rick Bloom, financial advisor at Bloom Advisors. He joins us today on the MegaCast. He's a partner at Bloom Advisors, an attorney, a certified public accountant, and a financial advisor. And so we've talked so much about planning for your financial future in the interim, in the intermediate, and years down the line as you're heading toward retirement, or just heading decades down the line to continue to have a plan in place. But what do you do then, Rick, when circumstances change? Because when circumstances change, when you have a crisis, when you have a pandemic, when you have a natural disaster, when you have a medical issue that comes up, when those circumstances change, your plans also have to change. Where do you start from the onset of one crisis versus another to change those plans, especially if you need to be changing them immediately?
Well, you know, Tyler, I believe when you set your plan, you have to have something set up for emergency purposes. I believe every investor needs 3 to 6 months of living expenses that they keep liquid. They're not investing that money in the stock market. It's kept in savings accounts and CDs, so they have instant access to it. So I always tell people before they invest money in the market, you should have an emergency fund. So exactly what you talk about, you won't have one event that totally derails your retirement or other financial goals. So I think that's something that everyone needs to do from day one, is to start building that emergency fund of money. And a lot of people are saying, wait a minute, I don't want to leave that money in CDs and treasuries and because it's not paying that much. Well, the goal of that money is not to get high returns. The goal of that money is instant liquidity if you need it. So I think that's the way you resolve a lot of these issues, is to have emergency funds of money. No one should be 100% invested. They need that emergency. 3 to 6 months of living expenses. And that's why it's so important to know what it costs you to live so you can have an adequate emergency fund.
We're joined by Rick Bloom, financial advisor and partner at Bloom Advisors Incorporated, with us on the MegaCast, talking financial planning for you as an individual, but also for businesses as well. And Rick, during the pandemic, a lot of businesses have taken a huge hit, whether it be in 2020 and 2021, or unfortunately for many of them, in both. Are there any advantages with you being a certified public accountant and being a tax expert? If you're in a position where you've lost a significant amount of earnings in your business, are there any advantages that can be taken tax-wise for these companies to try to limit a little bit of their tax hit in 2021 because of the circumstances of the pandemic?
And there potentially can be. It all depends upon your individual tax situation. With businesses, it's a little more difficult because whether they're a corporation, a limited liability company, things of that nature. And that's why, particularly if a business has losses this year, it is important to sit down with, whether it's their CPA or something, to go through the tax law to see what section of the code they may qualify for. And where it's a little crazy now is we still may get a change in tax law before the end of the year. And that tax law may be retroactive to the beginning of the year. So it is a crazy time for that. But there are opportunities for businesses, particularly small businesses. And on that note, what I'd also remind small business owners, there are a lot of state, local programs that small businesses can take advantage of, and they're not taking advantage of it as they should. So small businesses should never forget to contact state authorities, local authorities, to see what financial assistance is available to the business.
We're joined by Rick Bloom. He's a financial advisor with Bloom Advisors Incorporated, also an attorney, a certified public accountant, and a financial advisor as well. And we had an article that we posted on our website at civiccentertv.com earlier this week of people that are looking for jobs right now. And the Better Business Bureau has been warning people of a number of different job hunt-related scams and hiring scams as well. But there's also a lot of other scams that are out there for businesses and for individuals who are doing their financial planning, who are trying to invest in the market right now, who are trying to gain back some of the funds that they may have lost as a result of this COVID-19 crisis. What are some things that people should be aware of in terms of scams that they could fall victim to, especially on social media sites?
You're right, Tyler. And they come in so many different forms, especially like this time of year as an example, with charities, people giving to charities. There's so many scams, and they know that Americans are the most generous people on earth, so they pull at our heartstrings. You'll see videos of kids or dogs, and people pull their heartstrings out. So from a standpoint of charities, my general rules, what I tell people: 1, don't give to a phone solicitation. 2, don't give to an email solicitation. You have to check out charities independently. You have to go to places like charitynavigator.org to really check on the charity. See not only if it's legitimate, but if they're actually spending your money wisely. There's a lot of legitimate charities that just don't accomplish their charitable purpose. So I think people have to be proactive when it comes to things like charities. You have to learn to say no and to check things out independently. One thing that people are surprised to learn, that a lot of these phone solicitations, the phone solicitor sometimes makes 50% of the money that you donate. So I always tell people with charities, check them out with charitynavigator.org and really make sure you're using the charity the same name. Don't link to it from an email. From the investment standpoint, I get emails all the time telling me that this investment is the greatest thing since sliced bread and you can't lose. Well, first of all, everyone should know there's no investment you can't lose. So what I tell people is you have to have some sort of a game plan. So what I do is, 1, I don't invest in anything that I can't check out independently. If I can't check out an investment independently, I'm walking away from it. 2, I don't invest in anything that doesn't have a track record. And I generally want to see things that have been around 5 to 10 years so I could look at how it's done, individually. 3 is I want to make sure that when I invest in something, I'm also understanding the investment. I compare Wall Street a lot like to my watch. I may not know how my watch works, but I know how to work with it. And every investment you need to understand. If you don't understand an investment, you ought to walk away from it. People should learn from the Madoff situation. One of the things that Madoff always told people is, well, this is so sophisticated, you don't understand it. You have to trust me. Well, anyone who tells me that I'm not smart enough to understand something, well, I'm going to walk away from that investment. I want to know how I can make money, how I can lose money, and how I can get my money out when I want. I think those are 3 things. 4, I think that people have to realize that in a lot of these scams, they're out to charge you high fees and things of that nature. Costs do matter. Look at the cost of an investment. Even legitimate investments sometimes have these ridiculous fees that people need to be aware of. And lastly, when it comes to investment, you got to have the smell test. Something smells too good to be true. It is. I mean, if banks are paying 1% on CDs and someone offers you 6 or 7%, you have to have the red light go off and say, wait a minute, I got to be reasonable. And I think that's the number one thing. People have to be reasonable, Tyler. They can't let greed or fear dictate their investment decisions. I always find when someone's appealing to your greed or fear, you need to walk away from it.
We're joined by Rick Bloom, financial advisor with Bloom Advisors, joining us today on the MegaCast. And that's an important thing to think about, not only with individual investments, but also when you're talking to investment experts or experts in some cases with financial advisors. You want to be talking to people that are consulting you, not directing you, because ultimately it's not their money, it's yours. It's not their life it's not their life that they're helping you manage, it's yours. And if they're not letting you take agency in that, or they're encouraging you to not take agency and not take the initiative in making those decisions, something's definitely up, and you have a lot of questions to be asked.
No, and I agree. And what people have to realize in the financial world, they're just a lot of salesmen out there sometimes, and all they want to do is sell, sell, sell. They're not interested in your best interest. And because what's good for your neighbor may not be good for you. So people need to take their time. If they're going to use someone professionally, make sure it's a professional who's working for them, not working for an insurance company or something of that nature.
We're joined by Rick Bloom from Bloom Advisors Incorporated. He's an attorney, a certified public accountant, and a financial advisor. And during the pandemic, a lot of people, because of the financial straps of this crisis, because of the way that it's affected their business and has maybe shut down their office space, or they've had some issues paying their rent. Some people have, or paying the rent or paying their mortgage. Some people have gotten creative. They've rented out some of their office space to other businesses or to other individuals to conduct their business outside of their home, but in a confined space. They maybe they rent out a room in their home to make a little bit of extra profit on the year and help to bridge some of those gaps in their finances as a result of the pandemic. But tax-wise, that can have some major implications, and if people aren't thinking about that properly, they can run into some big issues with the IRS. So, Rick, do you have to claim what income do you have to claim on your taxes if you are doing something creative like that and you are making a profit off of it?
And one thing, you're right, Tyler, no one wants the IRS on their case. There's enough stress in the world today. You don't need that additional stress. So basically, what you look at, if you rent to someone under 14 days a year, no problem. You keep the money. But if you rent over 14 days and over, you have to include that in income. Now, you can take some expenses against that, but you have to include that in income. And a lot of people are saying, well, wait a minute. How are they going to catch me? I always tell people it's not a matter whether they're going to catch you or not. You know, we're Americans. We should follow the law. The law tells us that we have to include it, so we should. So that's the magic number, 14 days. So someone turned their house into an Airbnb and rent it out, once a year for a week, they don't have to include that in income. But if they did it once a year, every month they did it for a week, then they're going to have to include that in income.
Yeah, and in terms of the IRS, if you're following the rules and you're playing it by the book, they're more than likely not going to look at you. And otherwise, but if you're trying to cut corners and if you're trying to play fast and loose with the rules, you're more than likely going to throw up some red flags. And if there is a red flag, they're going to look into it, and they're not going to be laissez-faire about it. And you're going to have a big problem, a bigger problem than simply asking a tax expert, asking another expert about what you need to do. And if nothing else, it's better to be too cautious with your taxes than not cautious enough and end up in a position where you're dealing with the IRS and making them angry because you're breaking rules, especially.
You're so right. And one thing I tell people, and they're shocked to hear this, in my career, the IRS has never been easier and friendlier to deal with than they are right now. There really has been a change, and if people are having tax problems, don't ignore the IRS. You're going to get into more problems. Work it out with them. There are all sorts of plans and programs you could work out for payments, the whole bit, but the worst thing you could do is to ignore the IRS.
Yeah, and if nothing else, this crisis has made a lot of our institutions more aware and more empathetic about people's situations, especially if they're in a time of personal crisis, and saying, look, we know that you're not trying to avoid us. You're just trying to get by, trying to live your life, and you need to take care of your necessities, but we also need you to follow these rules and to do what you have to do to contribute to the tax base that ultimately runs this nation. And so they're providing those plans and they're providing those adjustments so that people can still follow those laws, but do so at a pace that isn't going to end up breaking their finances and putting them in an even worse position. We're joined by
the IRS. Yeah. I was just going to say, the IRS also recognizes people make mistakes and they need a break. And so if you go forth to them, they're much easier than they will be if they have to come to you.
Absolutely. We're joined by Rick Bloom. He's a financial advisor from Bloom Advisors Incorporated, also an attorney and a certified public accountant as well, with us today on the MegaCast. And going back to financial planning, going back to savings, and focusing ultimately down the road at the goal of having a fruitful or at least comfortable retirement. When you do retire, how much should people be withdrawing from their retirement accounts each year, and what should they be thinking about at that point to continue to manage their finances and maintain their retirement after they've reached that point?
I tell people that the maximum withdrawal, and I'm talking about when you first retire, 65 to 70 in that age group, really should be no more than 4% of your portfolio. That's at the high end. Because one thing people have to realize with retirement It's not like the old days with my grandparents, where their costs were their costs. Today, we have to have a rising income. I mean, think about what a new iPhone costs today compared to what it cost 5 years ago. So we constantly have to have a rising income in retirement. And that's why the 4% is important, no more than a 4% withdrawal. I feel more comfortable with a 3.5% to give people a little extra cushion, but 4% would be the max. And that's why, in that regard, when someone retires, it's important to also have a strategy with Social Security. So that all fits in part of your overall portfolio to make sure you can have a rising income the rest of your life.
Rick, anything else that people should be aware of or keeping in mind right now, or that would be important for them to think about going forward during this pandemic and as we're slowly starting to emerge toward an end, hopefully soon?
Well, I would tell you, particularly because we're close to the end of the year, people should look at whether they should do Roth IRA conversions. Roth IRA conversions allow someone to take money from their traditional IRA, put it into a Roth. The advantage is it grows tax-free, not tax-deferred. When you withdraw money from a Roth IRA, it's totally tax-free, and you don't have to have any minimum required distributions. And so I think this time of year, it's important to do that. And I'd also say for seniors, for those of you, keep in mind that Medicare open enrollment begins in another week or so, from the October 15th through December 7th. If you're going to make changes in your Medicare prescription D plan, this is the time to start learning about the plans in the future. And lastly, with everyone, should look at their situation from a tax standpoint, see if they should make any year-end tax planning, particularly for those of you that are charitable in nature, not itemizing your deductions this year. You may want to make your charitable contributions through your IRA if you're over 70 and a half, because it'll save you some money on taxes. So that's what I would look at doing now. And just to remind everyone, being involved with your finances is 12 months a year. It's something that you need to do all the time, and it's the only hobby I know of that actually can make you money as opposed to costing you money.
Well, Rick, we appreciate your time. Thank you for all this really important information and advice for people, whether they're planning for their financial future, planning with crises in mind, or just being aware of things that could slip through the cracks or cause them problems if they aren't keeping vigilant 12 months a year on their finances.
Well, thank you very much. It was a privilege to be here. Thank you.